What's going on, everyone? Keith Niebuhr with Gators Online, and this is Talking Gators, and it's Florida Georgia week, cocktail party week, and we've got a cocktail party Gators legend to join us, and that is Lee McGriff, the former Florida receiver, former Florida coach. He was an analyst on the radio for many years. His son was an All-American at Florida. Lee is an all-time Gator great, and there's no better guest to have this week. Lee, first of all, thanks for joining us. It's cocktail party time, buddy.
This is great.
There really is nothing like this series, this rivalry. It played in Jacksonville all but 2 years. From 1932 to now, 2 years because of the stadium being rebuilt in Jacksonville. They had to play once in Athens, once in Gainesville. Obviously, during the war, World War II, Florida didn't have a team for a season, so there was no game that year. But such great history to this game. And Lee, you've had a front row seat as a coach and an analyst, but you also were right in the middle of this. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention you are in the Florida Georgia Hall of Fame for this game, largely based on your efforts in the 1973 game. I believe Florida won, what was that, Lee, 11-10 over Georgia at the old Gator Bowl. And you had the catch at the end of the game that, correct me if I'm wrong, that made it 11-9, and then you all got the 2-point conversion, or somebody else got the 2-point conversion, right?
Georgia had 10. So
10, excuse me.
We came, it was let me think about it. Yeah, it was 10-3 and clock winding down. So we scored a touchdown on fourth down with less than 2 minutes on the clock, and then went for two and hit that and won 11-10.
Lee, who caught the let me get us both back up on the screen here. Who caught the 2-point conversion pass? It was Don Gaffney was the quarterback, correct?
That's right. Hank Fulberg. He was a tight end, and Dad was a well-known coach. I think his dad coached at West Point. But Hank was, at that time, Hank was about a 6'6" guy playing tight end in the 70s. That's a pretty tall guy. I think maybe the only taller tight end the Gators ever had was Jim Yarborough, who was 6'8".
Well, Lee, take me back to that drive. You only have 3 points. You've gone 50 plus minutes. Pardon me, and you haven't scored but 3 points. So, what was it? Do you remember? Could you remember that far back? What it was like in that huddle as that drive began? Who said what? Who was the leader on that drive?
Well, I don't know that anybody had to say anything. We pretty much understood this was it, do or die, and we had the ball on the 20-yard line to start the drive, and it was a windy, cloudy, chilly day in Jacksonville. And on that last drive, obviously, we knew we had to throw the ball, and the wind was in our face, and it was no joke. So we had some critical moments on that drive where it could have died. And one of them was on a third down, and I ran a quick post, and thank goodness the ball was a little overthrown, actually, but they committed pass interference, kept the drive alive. Then we had another third down situation, and I caught a long ball down the right sideline, and so we were inching closer. And there were some runs. Vince Kendrick was our tailback, normally a fullback, but our tailback. And he had made some runs. Joel Parker caught a pass, and we found ourselves, I think I have these yard lines right, but 4th and 8, and I think we were on the 12-yard line. This is it. So that was another critical moment, and we hit it. And, I've heard the miserable Buck Malou talk about the Lindsey Scott and how the stadium shook and the ground was shaking, and I want to strangle him. And, but I can tell you, the ground shook, and that place was bedlam when we pulled that one out. I can't hear you, Keith.
Take me into that huddle. Take us into that huddle before that catch. Before that catch that you had that made it 10-9. What were you? I mean, did you know, was the play always going to be for you?
Well, he's got, Don Gaffney has some reads, but if Don Gaffney had a nickel for every time I told him I'd be open, he could have retired out of college. So, of course, he calls the play, and I say to Don, I'll be open. Let it go. And that was kind of it. But, when you're in the middle of that, those situations, but you're sweating, you're playing, you're in it. You know what the situation is, but you have to execute the play. So, that there wasn't a lot of talk. Everybody was obviously very serious and focused and tuned in. And, one of the amazing things about that play with Don, Georgia blitzed. And there was a guy coming from the inside. I think his name was Keith Harris. I got to know Keith at the Dallas Cowboys when we went to training camp together. But Keith came through the middle, and he was 2 feet from nailing Don Gaffney. That'd have been the game. And Burton Lawless peeled back, our guard, Burton Lawless, peeled back and picked Keith off and let Don get the ball off. So,
and Burton played in the NFL, I believe, with the Dallas Cowboys, if my memory's correct.
He did.
Lee, what did this mean? What did that victory mean? Yeah, Don Gaffney, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't he from Jacksonville?
Oh yeah. We had a bunch of Jacksonville Reigns guys, and Don Gaffney had made his first start the previous week against Auburn at Jordan Hare at the time, and the Gators had never beaten Auburn there ever in 1973. So we eked that game out and beat Auburn. So now Don gets to come back to Jacksonville the next week against Georgia, and I think it meant the world to him because, again, he was a Reigns star, and what's a bit bigger showcase in Jacksonville for a kid that grew up there to play Georgia and what was in the Gator Bowl.
And obviously the first black starting quarterback for the University of Florida as well. Some extra layers of significance there. Well,
it did, Keith. And in fact, it kind of amazes me. Conridge Holloway was the first
That's right.
Starting black quarterback in the SEC. Don was only a year later. And Conridge was a great player. He gets a lot of attention, but the fact that Don Gaffney soon followed, he was a year younger than Don was a year younger than Conridge Holloway. But yes, that had those implications too.
I don't want to make you feel old here, but you realize we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary of this all happening, and it just must have felt fantastic. Now, you also, unfortunately for you, in Florida, you were on the other side of this series as well. The year before, you all lost to Georgia, I think 10-7 at the Gator Bowl, and then in the year after, in 1974, a very good Florida team that I believe played in the Sugar Bowl lost 17-16 at Georgia. Similar circumstances. You had to drive late again. You scored late again, and I'm sure the Georgia fans and the Georgia coaches and the Georgia players were probably thinking, "Oh God, here we go again." But that time, the 2-point conversion failed. Now, we should point out there was no overtime back then. I mean, it was, hey, we're either going to play for a tie or we're going to go for the win. And
That's
two straight years you went for the win. In 74, heartbreaking loss 17-16 when you went for two. And as I said, did not get it. And there was some, I've read some stories. It appears there was maybe a little confusion going into that play. It was a play that wasn't necessarily practiced for a while. What were the circumstances on the 2-point conversion in 74?
The most clear situation, and of course I told Don I was open. I'd be open because I always told him that. But Georgia blitzed again and blitzed from the inside. It was deja vu all over again. And we didn't pick him up. So Don had to hurry his throw. And I don't know, you may have talked to some players. I wasn't confused what we were doing. So I don't know, maybe there were some guys.
I had read a story, I think, where one of the players, this is from the day of the game, one of the players on your team said that it was a 2-point conversion play that you all hadn't practiced that much, I guess. It's so long ago. I don't know what you can remember.
I just don't remember it, and I don't remember thinking, "Oh man, what?"
So, Lee, before we move on, I want to throw this in here. That's you. That's your catch against Georgia, 1973. There you are with Mick Huber. Years later, But this catch against Georgia, look at the crowd standing up, covering their eyes so they could see the play. Just do you remember the play? Do you remember it like it was yesterday, or do you just what do you remember from that moment? You talked about the crowd being loud earlier, but do you remember the exact route? How detailed are your memories?
I remember it like it's now, every step. And it really, I was supposed to go, when it's down in distance, and in that case, we needed to score, we usually ran our curl routes where you go up the field and curl to the inside. And we ran those at 14 yards, but I had to get a little deeper to get to the end zone. And as you can see, the Georgia defensive back was on me. And so when I curled to the inside, he was there, but I knew I could see Don still had the ball. So I charged it as hard as I could. I sprinted towards him to try to separate. And the ball was plenty good enough to catch. It was a little high, but, I certainly got hit in the back when I caught it.
You got up there. You look like Michael Jordan there, Lee. I got to tell you. What was the bus ride? I don't know how nice the buses were back in 1973. What was the bus ride back to Gainesville like for you guys? Just try to put us in the moment of beating your arch rival in that game.
Yeah, it was a happy bus. It was a happy bus, and beating Georgia, in the 70s, they beat us more than we beat them. And I've watched this thing through the years, and when you talk about rivalry, the most heated rivalry is a team that hasn't won in a while. So, at that point, it was just a huge win for us to beat Georgia. And we had lost to them, excuse me, the year before with a late field goal by Georgia to beat us 10-7. So my years were 10-7 Georgia, 11-10 Gators, 17-16 Georgia. So those games could just with a blink gone either way. But that was a happy day. And I have to tell you, this is funny. That's back when we all lived in the dorm together in what was called Yon Hall, which was in the east stands of the stadium, which was, as one of my teammates used to say, "Hey, this is utopia." It was, it really was to some of us. It just, all the guys were there, and you've got some pretty funny, intense, competitive guys. There was always nonsense going on, but we all go back to the dorm. This is pre-cell phones, and my roommate was Jimbo Kynes. He was our starting center. And Jimbo and I went to Plant High School together. We'd known each other growing up. And the phone in my dorm room rang. And Jimbo answered the phone, and it was a fan. How that fan ever got that address. And he was out of his mind with happiness. And he is just screaming and yelling. And, of course, to show you how out of his mind was, he says, "You are the greatest athlete in the history of the University of Florida." So when I hang up, Jimbo says, "What'd he say?" I said, "Well, that guy just said I'm the greatest athlete in the history of the University of Florida." And Jimbo kind of says, "No, you're not." And I've never forgotten that. He put me right back in my place. But it was a happy night.
Lee, you also, like we said, you've been on both sides of this. And as a coach, as an assistant coach, a young assistant coach for the Florida Gators in the early 80s, you were unfortunately there on the sideline for the Lindsey Scott play, the 93-yard touchdown, which to this day haunts many, many people, probably a lot of sleepless nights. And then the year after that, Florida lost by the exact same score, 26-21, which is kind of an odd score to lose to a team one time, let alone lose to the same team by the same score the next year. But instead of a long play that hurt Florida, it was a long, sustained drive where Herschel Walker went left, Herschel Walker went right, and then finally Herschel Walker went over the top. But it was a different feeling back then. Georgia was in the midst of a 6-game winning streak. Florida had a new head coach, and Charlie Pell was trying to reestablish the program. What to you, though? I'm assuming the Lindsey Scott loss is number one on your most painful list of Georgia memories. Is that a fair assessment, or does it go back to when you played?
Well, playing, but coaching wise, they to lose, they all hurt. But the Lindsey Scott game, we were good in 1980, and if we beat Georgia, we might win the SEC. Georgia wins, they win the national championship. Isn't that the year they won the national championship?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Their
And
first one since 1942.
Yeah, and it comes down to that play. And we had a unusual game plan, unusual at that time. We put in 4 wide receivers, had moved Tyrone Young from quarterback to wide receiver, and he caught 10 balls and still has the most yards for a receiver against Georgia. And we had Georgia. Mike Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. They were lost, and we were throwing the ball all over the field. We were winning, and we got Georgia backed up, and everybody knows that story. 4th down, we got Lindsey Scott scrambling in the end zone. He hadn't been able to throw it in the St. Johns River all day, and he hits Lindsey Scott, but we're still in position to tackle him, but we don't. And he goes the distance, and it was just I really, no exaggeration, I can watch pieces of that game. I can't watch that because it hangs on me still. We win that game, and it may have been the Gators' first SEC championship.
Lee, what's it like? I mean, I can imagine, but I can imagine and not imagine at the same time. What was it like in the locker room after that Lindsey Scott play where you were so close? And people need to remember now, Florida had not won a game the previous season. 0 wins. Go to Jacksonville, almost beat Georgia, which was number 2 in the country at the time, would ultimately finish number 1. I believe Georgia moved to number 1 that day because Georgia Tech, of all teams, either tied or beat Notre Dame, and that allowed Georgia to move into the number 1 spot. But, Lee, you had them beat. You had the team that won the national title. You had them beat. Take me and put us into that locker room. But just, I mean, it must have just been utter dejection.
Yeah, it was.
What do you tell a team after something like that?
And it, not to overstate my case, but it's like a funeral. And when you, as players and coaches, you put so much of yourself, time and effort into those kind of games, and to lose one like that, it just was awful. And you're almost in disbelief for a period of time, and it was hard. It was really hard, but you got to go on, and we did. But
well, Lee, thank God for Steve Spurrier, right? That really turned the rivalry on its heels, I guess. And Steve went 11-1 against Georgia. A lot of memorable wins, but I still maintain that maybe the most memorable was the first one, because at that point, Georgia had won 15 of the last 20, 8 out of 10 in the 80s. Steve Spurrier arrives after the 1989 season. They go to Jacksonville, play a Georgia team that's not very good, Ray Goff's second season, but it's still Georgia. And Lee, everybody goes into that game. They remember all the teams from Florida that had high rankings and left Jacksonville with tears in their eyes. And Florida, lo and behold, goes out and blows them out 38-7. And it really changed the dynamic of the series and took it to another level for Florida fans. What do you remember about that game, 38-7? That was a big one.
Well, Steve just went about playing and going after wins completely different than anybody that preceded him. And the Georgia game, whether it was Ray Graves or Doug Dickey on the Gator side or Vince Dooley on the Georgia side, those were very traditional coaches that went into the game. They're going to run the ball. You're going to throw it when you need to. You're going to play the kicking game and field position. And so historically, I mean, there are some games even before Steve Spurrier's that were blowouts, but not many. They were close games. But Steve just went in like he did every game, trying to blow somebody out. And he did. And it just was the beginning, again, of the signal that he's just going to go about this in a different way. And it was just so decisive. And people get haunted by the past. They think, it's going good now, but oh no, Georgia, we're going to be jinxed. And he just went after it like he's playing in the backyard.
Lee, final question on the history of this series. You worked for Charlie Pell, and he did so many great things turning the Florida program around, but he never beat Georgia. And there's always been talk about how tight he was for that game. Are those reports out? It looks like they're accurate. You're already nodding. How accurate was that? How tight was he before that game? And what does that mean exactly? When we say, hey, Charlie Pell was really tight for Georgia, what does that mean, and how different was he for that game than other games?
Well, Coach Pell was highly organized in his practices, thorough. Preparation was so important to him. It is to most coaches, but he really went about it very intensely. But there comes a time after you've done all that preparation, you got to take a deep breath and you got to let the players play. But you could feel him even on game day before Georgia, where he was so uptight. You could feel it. The players could feel it. And kind of the opposite of Spurrier, Pell wanted to tighten it down, and let's don't take too many chances. I mean, in the 80 when we went with four wides, I was shocked he didn't just kill it, wouldn't let us do it. But the players could feel it, and I have to say, I do think it didn't help us on game day that he couldn't just take a deep breath and let us go play.
Interesting. All right, Lee, enough about the past. We've got a big game this weekend. Georgia's number one in the country. They've won 2 straight national titles. I mean, they are at the mountaintop of college football right now. I'm going to ask you point blank. Can Florida win this game?
Well, if you ask me, yes, because I think that anyway. If you get a chance to play, you got a chance.
Yeah.
But what transpired that I think Gators, including me, didn't know in the South Carolina game, could Billy Napier throw the ball? Was he willing to turn it loose? Could he attack with a passing game? Because, they've thrown it okay, but the focus has been the running game. And then along came South Carolina. And of course, there's those who believe if Coach Napier would have gone about the Kentucky game the way he went about the South Carolina game, we'd have beat him. And you saw that's what Georgia did against Kentucky. They threw it. So I'm concerned about our defense, but our offense just showed that we can throw it. And of course, they work hard at running the ball. So, the question is, can we stop them a few times? But, Mertz has proven that he's a pretty good quarterback and he can throw it. And we've got some receivers. I don't think we have a lot of them, but we've got some receivers, especially since Wilson came back, that really performed well against South Carolina. And that gives me hope that we've got a shot.
Lee, it seems like the offense is evolving. Young playmakers are emerging. Tight end, that Boardingham kid is something special, it looks like, Arliss Boardingham. You've got Eugene Wilson, the young freshman receiver. He's emerging. Ricky Pearsall now has help. He's playing his best football. The offensive line seems to be getting better. How much better is the offense right now, do you think, than maybe it was 5 or 6 weeks ago?
Oh, I think decidedly. And again, we were so focused on running the ball. Ran the ball really well against Tennessee. So that was a wow. Didn't know we could do that. But I just didn't know that we whether or not we had a full arsenal. Could we run and throw whatever we needed to do? And I questioned that until South Carolina. And not only could our players do it, but Billy Napier knows how to throw the football. He does. His schemes were good. His play calling was good. And so I think offensively we're much better. Obviously, you got to go do it again on Saturday.
Yeah.
I do think we've evolved and we're much more versatile.
Sometimes not sometimes, if you're going to pull off a major upset like this, Lee, you need some breaks. If the ball's in the defender's hands, he's got to catch it.
Yeah.
If the ball's on the ground, you got to land on it. But it has happened in this series before. Many times, the highly ranked team has gone in and lost to a lower ranked or even unranked opponent in this series. But it obviously is going to take a lot. I go back to the 2012 game when Will Muschamp was coach. Florida was number 2 in the country. And And Florida had 6 turnovers in that game, Lee. 6 turnovers, lost by 8 points, including a turnover on the final drive inside Georgia's 5-yard line. So it can happen. We don't know what the weather's going to be like. There's the guys get injured during. I mean, things do happen during the course of the game, but it does feel like this is a game, Lee, where it's going to take a special effort by Florida and maybe a little bit of a poor effort by Georgia. But it can happen. Is that a correct assessment, you think?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, Georgia's is very good. They're used to winning. They're used to playing in big games, and they think they're going to beat Florida. And when you're talking about Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp, those are 2 pretty intense guys. Georgia plays pretty intensely, so I'd have a hard time imagining. And you're talking about Kirby and Will both played at Georgia, so they have a healthy hate for the Gators.
Yeah, they're not going to let Georgia take Florida lightly. I think we can make that assumption.
Right. Yeah. And so I think they'll be ready to play, but that still doesn't mean we can't play, on a par with them. But I do think, we've got to be willing to take shots down the field and throw it when we need to throw it based on coverage and all of that. And then if they're backing off, we need to be able to run the ball, and we got to stop them some. We've got to be able to stop them some. And there's times where, feel a little uncomfortable about our defense, and can we?
Lee, what do you think about the emergence of all these young players on the Florida roster? You got a couple freshmen starting at safety. Eugene Wilson looks like a special player. Boardingham, the tight end we mentioned. Webb, the running back, is a freshman. He's come in and done some good things. You've got other freshman receivers. You've got Kelby Collins on the defensive line. The youth of this team, does it make you optimistic about the future? And then obviously knowing how Florida's recruiting right now, but are you feeling good about things headed toward the future?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly see that the recruiting's gone pretty well, and these young guys, you can see how they can become great players. So yeah, that's encouraging.
What advice? I mean, this game's unique, man. That's what I used to say about the Iron Bowl. There's just nothing like it. I don't know how you prepare a young guy for it. So what advice, if you're a veteran player on this Florida team? I mean, even Graham Mertz hasn't played in this game. He's played in big stadiums across the Big Ten, but this is different. This is a unique, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, everybody that's been knows what I'm talking about. And you've played in it, you've coached in it. It is different. What advice would a veteran give a young guy or somebody going into this game for the first time?
Well, you can easily you hear guys talk about, and I can tell you all the years playing and coaching, riding over the bridge, and how they describe, you see all the fans. I look down. I didn't want to see all that, because the pomp and circumstance is you can't help but feel it when you're playing, but that doesn't help you play well. And so, and when somebody says, like a bowl game, it's in a neutral site. There's no bowl game that's as intense as this game. I mean, it's a very intense rivalry. And I just think what you have to do, and what I would say when I was coaching, is just focus on your job. Focus on what you're doing. Remember, this is supposed to be fun. Turn it loose. Don't make up stuff in your head that makes this a more tense and dramatic than it needs to be. Go play. Go play.
Lee, in this rivalry, so many heroes and legends for these two schools have been made. Jack Youngblood, I guess the grip, rip, and strip play that I've heard so much about. And I think the 1970 game, your great catch, Ricky the Rocket Nateel, 96 yards from Kerwin Bell, Herschel Walker, Lindsey Scott, Danny Werfel, Eric Kresser with the 2 TD passes late at Sanford Stadium to have Florida set a scoring record at Georgia in the 1995 game. So many. Darren Hambrick's great run at Florida Field. Boy, people forget about that one. That unbelievable interception return. Anthony Lott calling timeout just before the tying touchdown pass was thrown from Eric Zier, which wiped that off the board, and Florida escaped in 93. Eric Rett's big running game. Lee, you can go on and on and on. I mean, it's just one of those games. So I ask you, give me 2 or 3 Florida guys that have a chance to reach that legendary status with the big game this week. Who are you keeping your eyes on?
You mean now or in the past?
Right now for this game. Who do you think could emerge as that next
Well,
Gator legend in the Florida-Georgia game?
I think Mertz, I think Pearsall, and Wilson, as you said. I mean, this is going to test his poise. Pearsall's been in this game one time, but in my mind, if the Gators are going to do well offensively, there's going to have to be some significant plays in the throwing game. I'm not saying a running game won't be good, but I think those guys, those three that and particularly Mertz, I think he's going to have to play a great game for us to win.
Is he? Look, I mean, we all had our preconceived notions about him, Lee, coming into the season. We looked at I didn't watch a lot of Wisconsin games the last few years, admittedly, but you looked at the stats and they weren't anything special. But you also knew that their offense at Wisconsin overall wasn't that special either. So was it the offense? Was it him? What was the issue? So we came in probably not thinking that much about Graham Mertz this year. And it seems like he has really surprised a lot of people. Has he surprised you? And if so, how much?
Well, I had a little insight and could cheat on this answer because Shane Matthews spends a lot of time over there. And Shane has a pretty good idea what he's looking at when it comes to a quarterback. And Shane told me before the season, he said, Graham Mertz would have been a star under Steve Spurrier. I happen to know my son, Britt McGriff, his coach at UCF, a guy named Sean Beckton, wide receiver coach, coached at Nebraska, went with Frost to Nebraska. He was involved in the recruiting of Mertz. They played against Mertz. And before the season, he said, that kid's talented. I know there's all this criticism. That kid's really talented. And so, being in a system affects everybody, but particularly a quarterback. And he's not a runner, but he's got a really nice arm. And he, from what I'm told, he's very bright. He understands the concepts. He understands what they're trying to do. So, I think it's always been there. He's just now. And what a statement he made a week or two ago, said, I'm having the most fun in my entire life playing for the Gators. That's pretty special.
All right, Lee, I don't know. Do you want to, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you want to make a pick? It's up to you. You got a prediction or not? What do you think? Or do you want to, you could give me a score and a winner, or you could just a general vibe about the game.
How about this? 26-21 Gators.
26-21 Gators. Well, that would be something.
I'll bring up that haunting score, but put it with the Gators this time.
Lee, I tell you, that was I think I was a little kid watching that Lindsey Scott game in Orlando, just barely remembering pieces of it. It's just still to this day. But God, you got 4th and Dumb. You got that game. You've got the 75 game, Appleby to Washington. Maybe it's Florida's turn. Maybe it's Florida's turn to have one of those. Florida's won plenty of games over there. Don't get me wrong. And Florida's pulled off plenty of upsets. But maybe it's Florida's turn to have a Lindsey Scott play or an Appleby to Washington play or something like that. We'll see. This is an unpredictable series. There's nothing like it. For Lee McGriff, Gator Great, I am Keith Niebuhr of Gators Online. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment. We appreciate all the support. Make sure you go to GatorsOnline.com right now. $1 gets you 1 month of all the best Florida Gators coverage. Lee, thank you so much, man. Enjoy your cocktail party week. 50 years since your epic. I mean, we're talking to Jerry Rice, who's the greatest leaper in NFL history? Who are we? Randy Moss. You mossed somebody, okay?
I'll tell you what, the older we all get, the higher I jump, But
Lee, you couldn't slip a 2 saltine crackers between my feet and the ground right now if I tried to jump, okay? All right. Lee McGriff, thank you so much. I'm Keith Niebuhr. Y'all take care. Have a safe week. Have a fun week and enjoy the cocktail party.
Thank you, Keith.